Hello everyone, and thanks for joining me for the first demonstration of the mastering course module. Mastering is the final stage of the music production process where we just put some fine-tuning adjustments onto a mix just to optimize them for the intended medium, possibly boost the volume, and just get the most out of your audio. What we're going to be focusing on today is some of the effects that mastering engineers use to achieve these sounds. So we'll be talking about things such as compression, equalization, and limiting. And although you might have heard some of these terms before and understand what they do, we're going to be using them in a whole different realm here in mastering. Let's get started. Before we can get started actually performing any mastering processes to our audio files, we need to import the songs that we want to process. So you'll see here in Reason that I've set up a session with 4 audio tracks because I know that my album EP is going to have 4 tracks, but they don't necessarily have appropriate names and there's no audio in here. So I'm going to, in the sequencer window, highlight the particular audio track that I'm going to be using and place the cursor where I want to import the audio. Go up to my control menu, hit File, and Import Audio File. And I'm going to repeat this process for all the other tracks while actually naming these appropriately as we go. Perfect. Now I have all the songs loaded in that I'm going to be mastering during this session, and I have everything labeled appropriately. So what are some observations we can make right away based on the audio files that we've imported here? Well, it looks like the last track here, entitled Limerence, the levels are quite a bit lower. So if we go ahead and solo this track and listen to it, it's going to sound quite a bit different than some of these others. So yeah, right away you can hear that some of these tracks, the volume levels are inconsistent. So that's part of what we're going to be working on. Now during the mastering stage, audio engineers typically put an audio signal through some effects processing to enhance the sound. Some of those common effects are equalization, compression, and limiting. These of course are only guidelines or suggestions on what to use during this process. Each mastering session is going to be different, but these are some of the commonly used effects processes. I also find it useful to spread out the songs that I'm going to be mastering for an album. That way I won't actually have to be switching between mute and select buttons, and I can just jump my cursor around between these songs as I'm performing the mastering processes. That way I can begin a song here, make some changes, see how it compares, etc. I also want to remind you how important it is to utilize the bypass functions on all the different effects processes. Sometimes you might think that you've made an appropriate change, but then if you actually turn off the effect, you'll notice that perhaps things were better the way they were, or you need to make some more adjustments. So let's begin some mastering processes on this first track titled Limerence and see if we can't adjust the EQ and give it a little boost to make sure that the volume is more consistent with the other tracks that are going to be included on this album. I'm going to make sure that I'm looking at both the sequencer window and the instrument or rack window and make sure that I show the insert effects on the audio track that I'm going to be working on. You can see that there are no insert effects actually here right now because I haven't created them yet. We have the equalization available to us via the EQ spectrum window here, so all I have to do is insert a compressor and a limiter to this section. I can do that by right-clicking in the open space. A compressor and a limiter, or in the case of Reason 7, a maximizer. So again, we have these effects placed here, but none of them are actually doing anything yet. We still have to make some adjustments to the settings. So let's just start listening to this song and begin with the EQ. A very common EQ technique is to boost the low and high ends just to make sure that there's enough bass sound and to give a little sparkle or air to your song. You should also keep in mind during the mastering phase that we're making relatively small adjustments, just trying to enhance things a little bit. Now, one thing that's so handy about this Spectrum EQ is that you can really tell where the frequencies are in this song. And that common problem is a buildup in these low middle frequencies that you see right here. This is because many instruments or sounds contain these frequencies, and sometimes they step on top of each other. So let's just reduce some of that a little bit. Nice. I think the EQ changes that we've made have helped out tremendously in this song. So let's now focus on the compressor. I'm going to increase my input gain just a little bit, and then I'm going to lower my threshold so the compressor starts working a little faster, and increase my ratio just a bit. Now you can see here that I'm having some gain reduction, so that means that this audio is actually being squashed a little bit. I'm going to make sure that attack is nice and quick. And then I'm actually going to increase my output gain a bit, just because I can see, especially here in the master section, that my levels are still pretty low on this song. Cool. But let's just switch the bypass function on and off to make sure that this is sounding better. I think it just beefs up that sound a little bit. Starting to sound better. Let's see how it compares to the other tracks on this album now. Still have quite a bit of volume difference there, so I'm going to make sure I utilize this maximizer to its fullest potential. What I really want to do is just increase the output gain so I can make the most out of this audio signal, and so those volume levels are more consistent with these other songs. So let's just listen and increase the output gain while watching the master section here. You can see we just started to clip a little bit, so I brought down the output gain. We don't want to actually distort or be in the red. But now we have maximized this audio. Let's see how it compares now. And with other songs. Nice! The levels are much more consistent now. So of course these processes are going to be performed on the other songs in this project, although some of the compression and limiting probably not to the same extent. When we get to the point where we feel like all the changes that we've made have benefited us and we're done with the mastering process, we're going to need to export mastered versions of all these audio files. So when I've come to that point, what I like to do is move all the audio files back to the beginning here. And then I'm going to go through these tracks one by one and solo each one that I want to export while setting the end cursor at the end of that particular clip. I've selected fear of rejection, set my endpoint. Now I just need to go to the control bar here, file, and export song as audio file. Of course, I'm going to name this appropriately. And save it in the appropriate place. And I just want to make sure that the format of this audio file is correct. We have two options, and I always like to choose WAV file because it's the highest quality. And when we're doing the mastering process, we want to make sure everything is of the highest quality. So save. And just make sure that our sample rate and bit depth are appropriate. So for an audio CD or an album, these are appropriate settings. Make sure that dither is enabled, and then we're going to export the song. Of course, this process is going to have to be repeated for each of the remaining tracks in your session. By now you should have a better understanding of how mastering engineers use effects like compression, EQ, and limiting to get the most out of their audio. But remember, mastering is all about critical listening. Spend a lot of time listening to the changes you make, and sometimes those changes can be very subtle. So sometimes you'll have to take a lot of time away from a song and come back to it just so you can have a fresh perspective. Keep practicing, and I'll see you next time.